Hi. I was just, reading about the, energy crisis in Syria. Hi, I'm Napoleon. I'm gonna talk about Chris. Wait a minute. Hi, I'm Chris. Today, I'm talking about Napoleon. Napoleon Dynamite, you ask? No. I'm talking about Napoleon Bonaparte. You know, the famous Emperor of France and all-around military genius. That Napoleon. Him and how much of an impact he made on the world as we know it. I'm not using a script, by the way. Scripts. I ain't using one.
Napoleon Bonaparte was born on the island of Corsica in the year 1769. He was of noble birth, meaning he got the best education possible. At an early age, Napoleon was shipped off into a military academy. When he graduated, Napoleon earned the attention of the Robespierres, and he was promoted to artillery commander, where he would use this role to lay siege to Toulon with great success. After the siege, he was promoted to brigadier general and was put in charge of the artillery division of France's Italian army. After the Robespierres were gone, Napoleon found himself in a pickle. In 1795, he was going to be demoted to infantry general, so he pleaded poor health in hopes of not getting that post. He got his wish. However, he was removed from France's list of active generals, and he started having money problems. Things turned around for him when a bunch of royalists declared rebellion against France's newest government leaders, the Directory. Out of their wits, the National Convention needed a solid defense against these rebels. They approached Napoleon in hopes that he could defend the Directory. Sure enough, with Bonaparte behind the wheel, the rebels abandoned their assault and fled, giving Napoleon cash, notoriety, and most importantly, promotion to commander of the Army of Italy. His first Italian campaign was successful. He forced Austria to sign a peace treaty, giving France most of northern Italy. He moved on to conquer Venice, which was given to Austria in a secret clause. His successful Italian campaign gave Napoleon even more fame and notoriety, moving him one step closer to becoming ruler. Despite an unsuccessful expedition in Egypt, he came back to France a war hero, and he couldn't have returned at a better time. Napoleon had heard through the grapevine that the Directory had become increasingly unpopular after France suffered defeats in the War of the Second Coalition. They were becoming more victorious by the time Napoleon returned, but by then the country was bankrupt, and the Directory became ineffective. With the help of some allies, Napoleon overthrew the Directory with a coup d'etat in 1799 on November 9th. Napoleon held voting in regards to approving a new constitution, and the people of France were overwhelmingly in favor, giving Napoleon enough power to be a consul. Napoleon went to great lengths to fixing France's economy with things like an efficient taxing system and establishing a national bank chain. He also took great measures to end corruption in the government. He removed all corrupt officials and set up government-run public schools to ensure skeevy officials would not make it to office again. Napoleon also established a set of laws called the Napoleonic Code, which appeared to have stuck to its guns with freedom of speech and press, but in practice it actually restricted free press and speech. Since the French people were all about Napoleon and how awesome he was, I guess they just didn't notice until much later. On December 2nd, 1804, Napoleon was crowned emperor by the Pope. Now, the old story goes that Napoleon snatched the crown out of the Pope's hands and placed it on himself. This would make sense since earlier in his regime, Napoleon signed a concordat, which is a fancy way of instituting its separation of church and state. Now Napoleon could begin his campaign against Europe. In the past, he wanted his empire to include the New World, but his colonies there proved to be too high maintenance, so he gave them to Thomas Jefferson in the Louisiana Purchase. His European movement was going a bit more smoothly. He made a puppet government out of Switzerland and annexed the Netherlands and a large portion of Italy. Scared of this recent development, Britain got Austria, Russia, Prussia, and Sweden to collate against Napoleon in an attempt to bring him down. Taking on these foes in his usual boldness, Napoleon won a series of large battles against them to assert his dominance. Perhaps his greatest victory was in Austerlitz, after which historians say Bonaparte lost his sense of reality. not in a hearing voices kind of way, but in a blinded by arrogant confidence type way. Prussia, Austria, and Russia were all forced to sign a peace treaty with France after so many losses, but one powerful enemy yet remained. In a way, he was grounded after the Battle of Trafalgar. A British fleet, led by Horatio Nelson, or the Napoleon of naval warfare, absolutely destroyed a French fleet off the coast of Spain. This forced Napoleon to rethink how to take out Britain, as naval combat would prove pointless. Napoleon would suffer more failures like the Continental System, an attempt to starve Britain of goods, and the Peninsular War, a failed attempt to take over Spain. His greatest failure, though, lied east. In 1812, tensions between Napoleon and Alexander I of Russia caused Napoleon to take his army and invade Russia. Starting in June, Napoleon made his way through the large country until he made it to Moscow. Out of supplies and no Tsar in sight, Napoleon decided to book it. However, by the time he decided to do that, winter had rolled around, the infamous Russian winter. On his way out, Russian soldiers would take pot shots at the surviving soldiers, and those who weren't shot died of disease or the cold. The Grand Army of France was reduced to 10,000. Taking advantage of this situation, every major European power went to war against Napoleon, and after a disastrous loss at Leipzig in Germany, Russian and Prussian forces stormed Paris. Out of troops and out of time, Napoleon was forced to step down. He was given a small pension and was banished to the Italian island of Elba. Now the European powers could relax, as they didn't expect anything further from the failed French emperor. But they were wrong. After Napoleon left, Louis XVI's brother took over as Louis XVIII, to little popularity. In fact, he was so unpopular, this caused Napoleon to be busted out of exile to regain power. In 1815, Napoleon left Elba and began his return to France. He was met with joyous crowds all the way to Paris, and not a single drop of blood was spilled. Napoleon was back, for the time being. Other European powers caught word of his return and were quick to act. The British troops, led by the Duke of Wellington, sat themselves down outside a town in Belgium called Waterloo. Napoleon engaged Wellington's forces, who were able to hold out until the Prussian forces arrived. With their combined forces, Napoleon's army was defeated, thus ending what he called the 100 Days, describing how long it took for him to try to regain power. This time, he was shipped off to St. Helena, an island off on the South Atlantic, where he died 6 years later in 1821, supposedly of stomach cancer. Now, let's talk about his impact on history. He left a bankrupt France and millions of dead Europeans in his wake, and his meddling with the Spanish government was one of the driving forces for Spanish colonies to strive for independence. Without a doubt, Napoleon was a tactical genius. He revolutionized how artillery was used, as he would always send artillery in first, then infantry. Because of him, it inspired American innovation in military professionalism and made our army more robust. For the longest time, generals would study Napoleon, and historians still do to this day. A few fun examples are Napoleon's appearances as leader of the French Empire in the ongoing Civilization series of video games, and having a video game based on his exploits, in the form of the strategy genre game, Napoleon Total War. The Battle of Waterloo in this game is darn near impossible to win, as only the most talented players could achieve victory. On a literary note, his invasion of Russia was recorded in the large book War and Peace. When the Napoleonic Wars were over, the European powers came together to discuss terms of keeping a lasting peace in what became known as the Congress of Vienna. The system of alliances established there would be relevant well into the early 20th century, World War I to be exact. Napoleon is a prime example of taking something great and using it for something completely sour. He's one of the most interesting figures in history I've ever learned about, and possibly the greatest general I've ever read about.